the 4th Column of the Shandong Jiangsu Army. Some 100 miles northeast of the camp. Jiang Ziqi was a teacher at the Siwei Middle School in Changyi in the guerrilla forces territory. In the winter of 1944, at Tipton and Hummel's request, she traveled through Qingdao and Weihsen at great personal risk and successfully brought back information about what was going on in the camp after their escape. She met with them secretly 3 times in a farmhouse in Changyi.
第一次见洪安市和地兰，他就是穿的是小棉袄，那是个冬天，棉袄棉裤。吃呢，我记得有一次是一个是大白菜炒肉，一个是大葱炒肉，这么2个菜，这2个菜就很不简单。那时候在那这个根本这个猪肉根本买不到，那是抗战的期间。这个外国人是最怕中国这个大蒜味和大葱味。我就开始往西说，我说这个中国饭你们那个习惯吗？吃习惯吗？弄成，他们就说，哎，中国饭好吃，中国饭香。第3次就换地方。
Out of concern for their own safety, Tipton and Hummel changed locations frequently, always under the protection of the guerrilla troops and the local people. Today, Xia Xiuzhen is 82. She and her family still remember hosting the 2 foreigners. After the 2 foreigners arrived, they asked for a table to work on. Other than that, they had little interaction with the Xia family. The Xia sisters recalled that their time in Dazhang was mostly spent writing.
有一个对这父母这个人就拿些笔抽的了，拿些笔抽的我挺生气的，我就问他你那个拿些笔抽的干什么？他说给那2个人写信。我说写信怎么是笔抽的？他说写这个信吧，就是转到他们那个国家，他也没说哪个国家，转到他们这个国家去嘛，这个信上是要武器，要了武器的帮着打一本。
Xia Xiuzhen's family was one of the Chinese families that took in Tipton and Hummel. They never asked for names or demanded for anything in return, even when they found out that one of the young men they sheltered had become the U.S. ambassador to China. When the Japanese found out about the escape, they launched a frantic search and cracked down on the camp, adding to the sense of tension and uncertainty. During this period, Tipton and Hummel stayed in the area around the camp, observing and facilitating contact between the camp and the outside world. They sent large amounts of information about the camp to the government in Chongqing and tried their best to raise money and supplies. In December 1944, a plane loaded with supplies left for Changyi, home of the Weihsen area guerrilla troops.
那天是个雪夜，下雪很大。当这个10点多钟的时候，11点多钟的时候，我们听着这个来了飞机，当时大家都不得这个戒备。不过当时有一想，日本鬼儿来袭击我们这些部队，他用不着黑警。白天我们当时他的飞机来袭击的话，我们也无可奈何。当时也就很郁闷。 他头一趟就是来引示这个地点飞过去，没投，接着又摇回去，又来，看了一眼这航线，这会儿就投了，他们投的很准确。4个行李，4个包裹，这4个包裹，2个是一部电台，电台和这个自动发电机那2个，这8个有2个药品包裹，有几个就是钞票。
After considerable efforts, the supplies airlifted in by the U.S. Air Force finally made it into the camp. For the inmates who had suffered shortages of vital supplies for so long, they were truly a godsend. Right after this airlift, Japanese troops from Fangzishang village and Gaomi Island combined to attack the guerrilla forces in Weihsen, and a large-scale eradication program began. The darkest hour had arrived, but the camp's inmates still had no idea how long they would have to wait for the dawn. But the darkest hour for the children of the camp came when they lost their beloved Uncle Eric.
About 1945, January, he became, shall I say, very slow. He's walking slow. And he kept saying, I don't know what's going on in my head. Something's going on in my head. I don't know what it is. And he went into the hospital, and the doctors thought it was, tumor, but they had no equipment to know.
Joyce remembered that the first symptoms of Little's illness were terrible headaches, followed by memory loss. For this, he sought refuge in his favorite book.
Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, and the last chapter of that is a very beautiful. The last words I remember were, "It is a far, far better thing I do than ever I have done before. It is a far, far greater rest than I have ever been before." So he learned, actually the last 3 chapters, he learned off by heart because of that sacrifice of one person for another, which he found very moving.
Little summoned his competitive spirit and recited passages from the Bible to help him focus and to strengthen his memory, and to allow him to take care of the children who depended on him and whom he could never forget. On a cold winter morning in 1945, Little went to see Stephen.
He said, "It's now winter, January, and you have no shoes." So he said, "Please use these." And his running shoes were wrapped up in a piece of cloth. They are very worn out, but not my own shoes are completely worn out. And he had taken string and had mended these shoes so that I could wear them. But I used them, and about 3 weeks after he gave them to me, he went into hospital.
On February 21, 1945, Joyce came to the hospital as usual to see Uncle Eric.
We all used to visit him in visiting hours, but I had my book with me. We were talking about it, and all of a sudden, in the middle of saying surrender, he had it was a spasm or a fit, and his head went back, and he started to shake, and I rushed off to call the nurse, and the nurse came in and put the curtains around his bed.
Joyce waited outside the doctor's office for what seemed like days, clutching the notebook in which she had kept track of his temperature.
He died soon after that. As far as I know, he did not become conscious again after. And of course I was feeling so terrible already. I was crying. I couldn't believe it. None of us in the camp could believe it at all. And it was as if the light had gone out of the camp. Everybody loved him so much. And it was just desolation for many of the teenagers that loved him so much. And the adults too, they were openly crying, and everybody in the camp went to the funeral, and it was.
It was a cold Tuesday morning. Bone-chilling winds swirled the snow. Eric's friends and co-workers carried a crude coffin, followed by an honor guard, and then by his students who formed a procession behind.
I was one of the pallbearers. You know, we carried the coffin. There are only 12 of us. I suppose I was one of the few, and I wore his running shoes. They're getting very worn out. But that was in February 1945. His wife and children never knew he died. They never heard this news.
For Stephen, Eric's friendship was the gift of a lifetime. His simple faith taught his students about love and tolerance, and made a deep impact on Stephen's own life.
He said, in the prison camp, I began getting up 15 minutes early to pray for the Japanese and the Japanese guards, Kempeitai, you know, the Japanese police. And he told us this, and then he challenged us to pray for the Japanese. He told us that if you pray for the people you don't like, he said, you pray for people you like. If you pray for people you don't like, then they don't change, but you change.
The conscientious efforts of the camp's teachers helped make their students' childhoods as normal and as enriching as possible. Out of the flames of war, they crafted something beautiful. For their students, this is a debt that can never be repaid. As spring arrived in 1945, the grieving inmates could only wait and endure. As time wore on, the inmates grew restless for change, and with the help of Tipton and Hummel on the outside, good news began trickling into the camp.
As the war was being won by the Allied forces, the Chinese with the Americans and the British, then we began to practice the national anthems of the different countries. But we never dared play the tune. We just played the lower parts. So we practiced all this so that when the war ended, we'd be able to play all these national anthems one after the other.
The Salvation Army Band blended the Chinese, US, British, and Russian national anthems together to make a victory melody, which they practiced over and over every Tuesday night in anticipation of the coming victory. Just to confuse the guards, they added some Christian hymns into the mix. With victory in sight, English inmate Joey and former Zhifu school teacher Jenny finally decided to get married.
In May 1945, when it looked fairly clear that the war was coming to an end fairly soon, from all the little bits of information we got, we were married. In fact, Joyce's sister was married 2 weeks before.
3 consecutive weddings brought some relief and happiness to the camp. And along with the weddings came some very good news. On May 8, 1945, Germany announced its unconditional surrender, signaling the liberation of continental Europe, leaving only Japan left standing. All of Europe was awash in a sea of joy. As news of the victory made its way over the camp's high walls, the inmates burst into celebration. 2 young men who couldn't contain their happiness found a special way to celebrate.
And they went up to the top of Block 24 and they rang the bell. Now, we didn't know that ringing that bell meant that the prisoners had rioted and they must bring soldiers from Qingdao or whatever.
This monumentous event occurred on Joey and Jenny's wedding night, a night that no one will ever forget.
And of course, when the camp wasn't being attacked, then they decided that maybe some people had escaped, so they had roll call, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Tensions ran high at roll call, more so than any time since Tipton and Hummel's escape. The inmates waited nervously in the dark, all except 7-year-old Janet, who found the whole affair to be curious and more than a little exciting.
For me, it was just it was marvelous because for once I was out in the middle of the night, because otherwise it was curfew and I couldn't go out. I never saw the moon. I saw the sun. I remember looking at the setting sun, but I don't remember the moon.
By then, US forces had conquered Iwo Jima and Okinawa and were moving toward the Japanese mainland. Victory was close at hand. In early August, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 15, 1945, the Japanese emperor accepted the Potsdam Proclamation, accepting surrender to the Allies. The Second Great World War, involving 61 nations and over 80% of the world's population, and claiming 60 million lives, was finally over.
There were some little rumours going round camp that something very important had happened and the war was finished, but we weren't sure. On the 16th, more rumours were going round, and on the 17th, the head of our discipline committee stood at the door of the discipline house office and read out that the Japanese had surrendered.
The rumors that Margaret refers to were a special part of life in the camp. They were eagerly awaited and often transmitted important information, including the news of the end of the war, which arrived on August 17, 1945.
In August 1945, August 17th, we were going about our normal business. I was in the room I was then living in with my wife, the top floor of the hospital, looking north, and suddenly we heard the throb of an aeroplane coming closer.
The sound of the airplane's engines grew louder and louder, and a bomber appeared, first circling and then gradually coming down to land near the camp.
Came and it came closer and closer, and we're all looking up. And you have to realize our camp was covered with acacia trees, all of it. It was beautiful, but we were totally camouflaged, so nobody knew we were there. And all of a sudden we saw this plane drop down, POW on the wings, that's right, and a big American Red Cross on the fuselage. We're free. And we got it jumping up, down, screaming, crying, laughing, hugging each other, and the plane took off. They hadn't seen us.
The U.S. Air Force emblem on the side of the plane sent the camp into a frenzy. That moment marked a turning point in the lives of every man, woman, and child who had spent the war interred at Weihsen. Several people had climbed the water tower and erected an American flag that they had prepared specially for the occasion. The celebrations began.
哇，我们手就举起来了，喊呐，当然他们听不到。那么这个飞机就盘旋在上空，大概飞过来有6次、7次。他们知道已经到了目的地，也看见我们在下面。突然，下面的门开了，7个人就跳伞。
The plane made a low-altitude pass, and 7 fully armed U.S. paratroopers jumped out, landing in a cornfield not half a mile from the camp. This is a picture of the scene taken by Huang Anwei, son of Huang Lede. A keen amateur photographer, Huang had been hiding in the field and managed to capture a precious piece of history.
I said, I'll be the first person out of 1,400 prisoners, I'll be the first one to get to the gates of the camp. And when I got to the gates of the camp, 1,399 people got there before I got there. The prisoners were wild. They were crying, they were screaming, they were hugging, they were dancing. They were down on the ground, pounding their fists on the ground. They were waving. Men took their shirts off, were waving as this plane kept circling around, dropping supplies.
Manna from heaven. It was wonderful. The most exciting day of my life. And for anybody that you ask about that was at Weihsen, it was the you could never live anything like that again. Freedom, after all those years.
On the afternoon of August 17, 1945, the soldiers assigned to the Duck Mission took off from Kunming in a B-24 bomber. After landing in Weihsen, they immediately approached the camp in battle formation. They were surprised to be greeted not by resistance from the Japanese guards, but by a rapturous welcome from the camp's inmates.
And these were our heroes, these 7 men. Oh, what excitement! What excitement! And they came into camp and they expected they might have trouble. Some of the campers, I've read, had knives in case there were difficulties to attack, keep the Japanese at bay. But there was no trouble. They just handed over, and the Americans took over our camp.
They came down, and we immediately, the band was asked to assemble at the front gate. So we all brought our instruments, and then we played the national anthems of I think, America and Britain and Holland and China and all these different countries. And of course everyone enjoyed that. Great moments.
The instruments that had been smuggled into the camp 3 years earlier by Joyce's father and others had always inspired those around them. The victory medley composed by the band members themselves became the sweetest music that the camp's inmates had ever heard.
And when they got to that part, oh, say, does that star-spangled banner still wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? The young American Major Stanley Steiger just slipped down from the shoulders to a standing salute. And a young American trumpet player just fell down on the ground and began to cry because he knew what we all knew, we were free.
The bravery of the 7 paratroopers who liberated Weihsen, who were known as the Guardian Angels, and who arrived in a B-29 nicknamed the Armored Angel, immortalized Weihsen. Their buttons, badges, and even pieces of their parachutes were snatched up by the inmates as souvenirs. They signed autographs, and one little girl even cut off pieces of their hair. Children followed them through the streets, into the cafeteria, and even into the bathrooms, never for a moment letting them out of sight. Wang Chenghan, the mission's Chinese translator, was also the focus of attention. Along with his 6 teammates, he risked his life to free people he did not even know, something for which he will be forever remembered as a hero. With the war over and long years of imprisonment at an end, the day of the camp's liberation became the most important of their shared memories.